Are you just starting to get into online chess, or do you find that you are stuck at a certain level, say about 800, 1000, 1200 or so on chess.com or Lichess? Hey everybody, this is Grandmaster Max Illingworth here, and for today's lesson, I'm going to actually go through a lesson that I gave my wife, who plays chess fairly casually, earlier in this week. And because I'm kind of presenting it to you a second time rather than the live recording, it's going to allow us to be able to go into a bit more depth, to cover a bit more ground, and to really just help you as much as possible to fully leverage the power of this video recording format. And just to sort of go a little into the main things we'll cover, it's going to be things such as how to play some better openings, how to make sure you keep your pieces safe and take the pieces of the opponent, and also a few little kind of positional and strategic aspects to help you know what to do when you don't know what to do in a chess game. Does that all sound good to you? Also, one thing that came up in this lesson was also that my wife here wasn't entirely sure about a couple of different chess rules. So let's say, for instance, if you don't know what en passant is, or exactly how it works, basically, I can give you a little bit of a question to make sure you've got it. So let's say we play this sequence, and black now plays the move f5, for argument's sake. In this position here, can white take en passant or not? And if you did say that white could take en passant, would that be taking the pawn on d5 or taking the pawn on f5? Okay, you've had a bit of time to think about it. If you're enjoying the video, do make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing. So in this position, we can't take en passant this way, even though the black pawn is opposite our pawn, because en passant is only available for one move, essentially, and it's only available right after the opponent moves their pawn 2 squares forward, right next to our pawn, like this or this. So the answer is that yes, we can take en passant with e takes f6 in this position. Of course, just because we can take en passant doesn't necessarily mean that we should take en passant, contrary to what you might have seen in some other chess videos. But it's good to know when it's legal to do so, and of course, if we had played one extra move for each side, well, we can't take en passant anymore because the pawn didn't just move 2 squares forward next to our pawn. Another move's already been played since then. Something I'll notice, by the way, with this lesson is that I'm going to deliver it a little bit more quickly than I would if it was a private lesson, because I know that if you need a bit more time to think about a position, you can always pause the video, or if you need to go over some explanation of mine again, you can always just go back and watch it a second time. So I'm going to leverage that to kind of up the speed a little bit to, keep you guys engaged and to, make sure we can kind of cover a bit more ground as such. So having answered this question, I'm going to dive a little bit into the opening review that I did, because the way that my wife is sort of playing the opening with white and black is actually similar to what I see a lot of other students do, where they'll sort of play kind of some move. In this case, my wife is playing d4 mostly, but then they sort of won't really have a kind of clear setup prepared, and we'll just kind of develop the pieces without really thinking about it. End up in a kind of passive position where I don't really know what to do in the middle game. Now, that might sound like you, perhaps, and so I think this is going to be interesting, where after e3 and knight to f6, well, say if you had this position on the board, what would you play here as white? Of course, in this position, there are several reasonable moves, but previously my wife was mostly playing the move knight to c3, and often getting a position like this one here. But it's a bit of a stodgy position where it's kind of hard to find an active plan, because you can't play c4 to attack this pawn because the knight's blocked. It's hard to get an e4 as well because black's just covering it with too many pieces. We can see here that, if we were to play e4, black's defending it 2 times, and we're covering that square once, so it's just not a safe move for us to play. This is an example of the skill of counting, by the way, counting the number of attackers and the number of defenders in a position for a particular piece or a particular square and so forth. So I was quite impressed when my wife figured out that, okay, a better move is actually to play knight to f3 in this case. But then after e6, she played the move knight c3 anyway, and I sort of showed her how, after playing a few more moves for both sides, where we got kind of this position on the board, I sort of taught her about the TV concept, and it's something you might notice as well as we go through this lesson, how, some color commentary like arrows and highlighted squares already come up, because, well, it's something I already taught to her. So it saves me, drawing the arrows for you guys in that sense. But anyway, in this position, you might be wondering what exactly is the TV concept, and what it means that basically the bishop on b2, which is currently fianchettoed, as it's called, basically it has a somewhat limited vision of the board, because, well, we would love to have a nice wide open diagonal for this bishop, right? I could see all the way like to, if not h8, at least, somewhere along the center of the board. But because the knight on c3 is in the way, it means that the bishop on b2 is kind of, its view of the TV is blocked. Like the knight is kind of like that tall person standing in, sitting in the cinema where their head's like blocking the screen and just really annoying for you. So then I played a slightly different sequence for her with bishop d3. This is known as the Colle Zuckertorza, by the way, the one that I am about to show you. In actual lesson, I'd type up the name, but if I did it, then the view of the board would scroll down and you wouldn't get to see the board properly. So I'm just going to be doing it verbally rather than, writing a notes I normally would in a private lesson. And also with the material as well, like you would have the access, to all of this material, like be able to replay it yourself at your own time and at your own pace as such. So yeah, that's something that will, is also kind of a bit of added value, let's say, for the lesson. Just bear with me for 1 sec. I'm just doing a little bit of an editing job here. Okay, that all looks good. So in this position, what would you play in this case as white? Let's say if we have a better move than knight c3, which it turns out we do, well, what might that better move be by comparison? So at this point, keeping in mind the TV concept, we know that we want to keep this diagonal open for the bishop in general. And so you might have realized that the d2 square is a much more flexible square for the knight than c3, because it keeps a long diagonal open for the bishop. I suppose you could also add it does keep the option to push our c-pawn, where the move c4 and putting the 2 pawns in the center becomes an option as such. But the plan that I showed in the lesson is this idea of playing the knight to e5, and I sort of, talked about a couple of nice points about how the knight in the center, can move up to 8 squares, as you can see by the, highlighted squares the knight can move to. And something interesting that I didn't mention in the actual lesson, which I think you guys will find really insightful, is if you look at how the knight moves, you might notice that our knight is currently on a dark square on e5, right? But when it moves from a dark square to a light square. So it means that if you want to control the light squares with your knight, put it on the dark square. If you want to control the dark squares, put your knight on a light square. A little bit of the geometry of chess at play. And after bishop b7 and f4, we see white go for what's known as a stonewall setup, where we can bring a major piece to h3 to put pressure on the h7 pawn, and build up an attack against the black king. And that's what I want to share, with my kind of overall approach. You'll notice that I'm not just showing you some opening theory or some traps or theoretical move, but really giving an understanding of, okay, this is a plan that we can follow to get into a middle game, and not just get into a middle game with a decent position, but when we're starting to put pressure on the opponent and start to take control of the game. And if you're really stuck on sort of a general strategy, a sort of good basic strategy to kind of kick things off when, let's say, there are no immediate tactics in the position, it's just ask, well, how can I put my pieces to be able to move to as many squares as possible, or the other way to look at it is to control as many squares as possible. So that's kind of a good starting point for make sure pieces have the full mobility that they can move as freely as possible. Okay, if we go to the opening review for black, because this setup can be played against almost anything that black does, well, at least this one anyway, so it's kind of nice to have a good one-size-fits-all in that respect. I will say that for most students I would focus a bit more on the move e4 in a lesson, but for this sample lesson, yeah, we're covering d4 as it's, a little faster to explain it as such. Whereas with e4, yeah, you have to be ready for like e5, c5, you know, the French, the Caracan. You get the idea. So a bit of a broader ground. We're going to the black openings. I'm going to mainly focus on e4 as such. You know, I did show my wife a few ideas against d4 as well, but I'm going to mainly focus on e4 because that's what you're going to face in the significant majority of your games up to about a 1600 or so level. Once you get past 1600, it becomes a little bit more balanced between facing e4 and about all the other moves combined. But yeah, if we take... before I get into knight f3, something I should test for you guys, because it was something that was a bit of a challenge for my wife, actually, when she was playing, is what would you play against queen h5 in this position? I'll give you a moment to think about it. I realize some of you are going to know this already, because like you might have learned this as one of the first things you learn from your chess practice or chess training, but you would be surprised, you know, how many inexperienced players will kind of mess this up here a bit, and will play a move like g6 and, you know, just let white take and fork the king and the rook. This way it's really valuable to ask the question of, you know, what is my opponent's threat in the position, because when you ask that question, it allows you to, well, not fall for some simple threat of the opponent, and to look for some more aggressive ways that we can defend. The simplest answer is just to play knight c6. And you'll notice how black is now starting to defend in a more aggressive way, like not just defending the pawn, which, to be fair, is not a bad move per se to defend the pawn with the queen, but g6 is kind of a more effective defense, because you're not just preventing the 4-move checkmate with queen f7, but you're also attacking the queen, which limits their options, and you know, notice that the e5 pawn is now defended by the knight. And then when they move, this is something that I see so many players kind of fall for. They think, oh, the only idea of queen f3 was to make sure that we wouldn't take their queen, you know, defend against our threat. So let's start attacking them, you know, and bring our knight in, and you know, then they get the sad news of queen takes f7 checkmate, because the bishop defends the queen, and you know, you get the idea. So make sure not to fall for that. This is really important. You know, when the opponent defends against your threat, still ask the question, what is the opponent's threat? Maybe they don't have a threat and you can do what you want to anyway, but when they do have a threat, you definitely want to make sure that you see it. So in this case, we can just play knight f6. We're going to go for a little Fianchetto setup, and that's going to give black the better side of equality. Because by moving the queen twice early in the game, what's happened is that white has kind of lost the early initiative. And it's a question I will ask virtually all of my students the first time they have a lesson with me. I'll ask them the question, you know, what exactly is the initiative in chess? Because a lot of people think of the initiative as just being like, you know, making some basic threat against the opponent, like, you know, oh, we're threatening checkmate, therefore we have the initiative. But it's really not that simple, because let's say after knight f3, if we take the Philidor defense just as an example, because it's what my wife was mostly playing before our lesson. Now let's say white plays bishop b5, you know, saying, you know, let's just play a check, because, you know, it's the one threat you can't ignore. You can't ignore a check. But the thing is that a good question to ask when you're looking at a sort of threatening move to make is, okay, it's a threat, but what's my follow-up going to be after my opponent's most likely reply? And if we don't have a good follow-up, as is kind of the case after c6 attacking our bishop, well then maybe we should reconsider whether we should play this threat in the first place. Because now, you know, the bishop has to move a second time anyhow. c6 is kind of a useful move for black, and, you know, so it means that white has lost the initiative, and it's not just you lose the initiative, but you also, it kind of then passes to the opponent in a sense. Kind of like having the ball in soccer. That's kind of why I like to liken the initiative to, in that only the side who possesses a ball can score a goal, and, you know, unless, you know, you score an own goal, we'll get to that a bit later. But you have to possess the ball in order to score a goal, right? And it's the same in chess. You have to possess the initiative if you want to checkmate the opponent, if you want to have the overall control of the game. And I definitely recommend, like, in terms of your opening approach, that you look at it from the perspective of trying to take control of the position, especially with the white pieces, but also sometimes with the black pieces when white plays a little bit passively. Now, I'm wondering if you guys heard of the fork trick, because the fork trick is one that is something that you're going to get quite a lot in your games. In fact, I was coaching a private student a couple of weeks ago who was just starting to get into chess, where I said, you know, you're going to get this a lot in your games. And he's like, on the first day, he didn't get a chance to play it, but then the second day, he managed to beat a high-rated player in just 7 moves using the fork trick. So that was pretty cool to see that. So the fork trick can arise from a few different move orders, but after bishop c4, knight f6, if white were to play the move of knight to c3, which you'll also see quite a lot, by the way, from move order of knight c3, knight f6, and bishop c4. I'm using that move order just so you don't get distracted by different arrows and such. But what do you think would be a good move for black in this position? And if my wife, you don't know what a fork is kind of like attacking 2 different pieces, or at least several different pieces at once. Kind of like you have a fork, like, you know, how you put on, you know, some potato and you put on some meat and you put on some rice all on the, you know, one fork. It's kind of like that with chess as well, attacking several things at once. So just based on the fact that it's a puzzle, you might have realized that the move that you might normally play here at bishop c5, that it's certainly a reasonable move to just play your normal kind of scheme of development, but it's not exactly putting pressure on white's position, yeah? So a more effective approach, the fork trick here, is where we can play the move knight takes c4. Now, you might be thinking that knight takes e4, I'll just use it for this example. You might be thinking, we're just blundering a piece because they can just take our knight for free, right? But the point is that we have the move d5, and now we fork the bishop and the knight at the same time. I've noticed that when I show this in the first lesson to various beginning chess players, or if we want to be more politically correct, players who are just starting out, well, often will be wondering about, you know, how the position can play out from here. And most of the time you're going to face bishop takes d5, but then you just get a very lovely position where you have the bishop pair, you've got the space advantage, you're already attacking their knight. And if they do attack your queen, again, remember that a move isn't just defensive, but a defensive move will often have a counter-attack to it as well. We can then move our queen to safety. Honestly, you could castle either's flank here and you'd probably be fine, but if you want to attack a little bit more dynamically, you might like the idea of playing bishop to g4, castling long, and then going for an attack on the king side as a way to really take control of the game. So, and it's other kind of a thing when you have opposite side castling, you'll often see both sides go for a bit of a pawn storm. And this is something that if you're having like lessons with me every week, what I would do is I'd sort of introduce the concept and say, this is something we'll go into more deeply in a later lesson, because the purpose of the first lesson is kind of to sort of introduce a lot of different ideas that you might not be cognizant of before. I'm saying, of course, you're not going to master it in just one lesson, but kind of introducing the sort of ideas that once they do come naturally to you, are going to see you getting to a 1400, 1500, 1600 online rating relatively rapidly. Because actually it doesn't require that much. Like, it mostly just comes down to not, you know, blundering pieces, seeing the, you know, basic tactics that the opponent allows for you to play, and also just having some basic kind of strategic ideas to work with, like how to control the game, how to kind of build up our position in a healthy way, kind of having all our pieces work together as a team, right? Like in a football game, you know, every player on the field has their own role, you know, like, I don't know about football to remember all the roles, but, you know, have like the goalie, the midfielder, the, you know, attacking positions, and so on and so forth. And so it's the same with chess, of like every piece on the board of filling its role in, you know, working towards a common goal. That's really what chess harmony comes to. There are a few other things they can play. You know, if they play bishop d3, you can kind of go for a similar setup, except this time you'll be castling short rather than long, and, you know, you can go for a, you know, a nice little attacking setup like this. Of course, white gets to make moves as well, but this is just to give you a bit of a middle game plan to work with, to show you, you know, specifically how we take control of the game by placing our pieces actively, grabbing space with our pawns, make sure all of our pieces are in the game, and find those ways to create threats against our opponent's position. Actually, it's a pretty good framework. I would probably normally write it down in a lesson, and it's something that you should probably be writing down right now, that framework I just shared. So since you don't have it, you know, where normally a lesson like I'd scroll down and, you know, show you the written notes and you just could copy off that. But let me just repeat what I just shared. So the steps to taking control of the game, to taking initiative, are, first of all, to basically develop your pieces actively. Or if, you know, if it's a middle game, you know, place your pieces actively. That's number one. Number two after that is to take space for our pawns in order to have some control of the center of the board. The third aspect then is to make sure all of our pieces are well placed, that all of our pieces are involved in the game. That does kind of sort of match a little bit with step one, but often the key to a successful attack will be making sure you bring all of your friends to the party or having all of your players on the field. And then the fourth element is finding a way to create not just one threat, but kind of a flow of threats that sort of build on one another. Like, for example, here, you're not just playing f5, but you're also setting up a move like e4 to attack the knight. When the knight's that way, you're also setting up queen h4 to set up a mate against h2 with the bishop and the queen. So you can sort of feel the flow of threats that are coming from that, right? That's really the key distinction to understand with the initiative. And by the way, there are even some international masters who don't fully apply this in their games, so if you're sort of understanding it now, like, you're already kind of ahead of a curve in a sense. And if it's something where you're still kind of, getting a feel for it, like getting used to, these concepts, if it feels a little overwhelming, that's okay. We're going to go a lot deeper into that in subsequent lessons. So a common question I also get is also what happens if, white does play an intermediate move and play something like bishop f7. Because I know that a lot of beginning players, even some intermediate players, will sometimes get a bit nervous about their king safety here with the king in the center. But in fact, we can castle by hand here, where our king can tuck away on g8, as if we had castled. We have taken over the center. We're already threatening to, use the overloaded knights to our advantage by attacking the other knights. Obviously, we can't take the knight with a queen because this one's covering it. But if we kick that knight out of the way with a pawn, well, you can see how, if I just make a random move for white, you can see how if this knight moves and this one gets taken. But it's hard to ignore the threat because a pawn is a lot more valuable than a knight, right? It's all what I mean with... Well, let me ask you this. Which piece do you think is the best attacker in chess? Do you think that the queen is the best attacker, or do you think that the pawn is the best attacker? So a lot of people say the queen. In fact, it's what my wife said as well, because the queen is the most powerful piece. That is definitely true in that sense. But the fact that queen is so powerful actually makes it sometimes less effective as an attacker, right? Because, like I said, you can't just take the knight with a queen because you're just losing a queen for a knight. But if you attack with a pawn instead, like, even if we took h6 example, you can sort of see how, you can't just defend the knight because, black's just going to take it and, win a piece for a pawn. So we can see it's actually the fact that the pawn is the least valuable piece that in a funny way makes it the best attacker, because it's much harder to ignore a threat from a pawn than to ignore an attack from a queen. Does that make sense? Okay, let's get into the next aspects. There were some more opening things I did cover in this lesson. It's sort of the way I kind of structure my lessons. In the first lesson, I like to do an opening review where I go through, the games that you've played, and I kind of give some very specific feedback based on, some common mistakes I've seen you making. It sounds like it's a quick win, like how you can play the opening a bit better to maximize your results against your usual opponents, to be ready for the things you'll face the most often. You can't see this right now because it's sort of within the lesson study, but what I do is I also include a lot of puzzles as well for you to basically try to solve in your own time for different key positions. Because the way to really remember your moves, like maybe you have a situation where you've kind of seen something before, but then you don't remember it when you get it in a game. So by actually sort of getting you to think about it yourself and try to figure out the right move before I give you the answer, that's what's going to make it so much easier for you to remember in your own games, because it makes it your own experience. And this is also why in my lessons I tend to focus a bit more on the game analysis of like looking at your games. And before I do analyze this game from that my wife played, which is a really, really instructive game, in fact, I want to sort of share a little bit about, not just, let's say, showing you the game analysis process, but like giving you a little bit of an understanding of how it works. Because, like I said before, you tend to learn best from our own experiences, true or true. And so, yeah, I could show you, someone else's chess game and, show the same concepts there. But you're just going to retain it much better when it's something that, you've already experienced for yourself. And I realize that by using the examples, of my wife's games here, there's a little bit of a different dynamic that, showing someone else's experience. But by sort of asking you different questions about this, how I'm able to help you to, retain the key ideas and make it your own experience. And that's something you definitely should be applying to your chess training as well, which is something we'll get to a little bit later in this little sample lesson as such. So, and also I think it's kind of important, like I know a lot of you, at least this is my experience when I'm coaching all private students, so a lot of them are already, in chess.com, like doing the game review and, seeing what the engine says they should have played instead, or, if you're playing on Lichess instead, perhaps, then you might request a computer analysis and see, okay, the computer says I should play this instead. But where just knowing, like, the better move itself isn't going to give you that big of an improvement in your games, where the big improvement really comes, and this is something you're going to experience actually in the next half hour or so of this training, is in understanding, well, what is it that I needed to see, like what moves do I need to see in order to play the best move here? What positional or strategic aspect of positions do I need to appreciate in order to play the best move here? And it's something that with a lot of effort you can figure out for yourself, but it's just a lot faster and a lot easier with a coach, right? Now, one thing that's really hard to do by yourself, because it requires a really great self-awareness and experience, is to understand, well, what's the kind of thought process I need to adopt in order to make those better decisions in those situations in the future, and how can I, train that thought process in order to, to make it that I do find those moves in my games. And that's very hard to do on your own. That's where really a coach such as myself can provide really a large amount of value in that respect, and save, those hundreds of hours of like trying to figure out yourself, the frustration like working hard but not feeling any progress. It becomes a lot more simple when you've got someone to guide you, right? So let's get into this game. In this one, my wife, actually it's funny, I remember I was actually like looking at this game like whilst my wife was playing it, but I wasn't like, sort of saying it, I was like watching it silently. So in this case, yeah, she played the move Queen f3, and already you can sort of, bring out the queen too early is just not really going to be effective here. Now, after knight f6, I mean, one of the issues we already kind of talked a little bit earlier in the lesson about the sort of the issues potentially of developing the queen early, that, because the queen is such a powerful piece, it means that when the queen gets attacked, it sort of allows the opponent to develop with tempo, or in this case, grab space in the center with tempo. Whereas, let's say if we take knight c3, well, is e4 a good move in this position here for black? This was a relatively easy counting puzzle, but I just wanted to make sure you're still paying attention. So here white can actually take the pawn because, we have two attackers, they have only one defender. And it might seem easy in this case, but there are definitely much more complex examples of counting which are actually going to come up in this game analysis. So black played c6. I think black was trying to prepare the move d5 and maybe didn't realize that, you can actually just play d5 immediately, because you have two defenders, they have two attackers, so therefore the d5 pawn is safe. After c6 we had d3, d5, bishop d2. There are some possible improvements for both sides, but I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit to get to the key position, and also because of this being a video, like in the actual lesson, I was kind of skipping some of the, let's say, puzzles for black to play. But this one's kind of a really good learning point I want to share with you guys. It's sort of a nice thing as well, the video, like when I'm doing actual lesson, I'm kind of cognizant of, like, okay, how can I put the maximum value like into this 1 hour as such? So there'll be some case where I might refer to something and not go deeper into it, because it's just not the most important for that particular student. Or, it may just be like a relatively minor point, but while I've been talking about this, maybe it occurred to you that the bishop is under attack, but what most people do is be like, oh, the bishop's under attack, let's just move it to a safe square and not really think deeper than that. So, well done if you realize that we can actually ignore the attack on the bishop. And this is something that you probably want to write down, when the opponent makes a threat. Don't immediately just think, okay, how do I move my piece out of the attack? But ask yourself, can I make a stronger attack? Ignore the opponent's threat by making a bigger threat of our own. And that's what black did here with bishop to d6. Now, what white should do is just move the queen, but my wife thought that white could play the move f4 to block the attack. And this is something that came up very early in the lesson. I'll try to jog your memory a little bit here. But what do you think black should play in this position? And by the way, this is something that black also missed in the game, and I realize you don't see the ratings, but both my wife and her opponent, Lavina67, were rated about 1,000 on chess.com Rapid. So if you're rated 800 and you found this, well, you found something that a 1,000 player didn't. And the answer, by the way, is that black can take en passant with e takes f3, because this pawn just moved 2 squares next to the opposing pawn. But as you can see from the arrow, it's not just that you take a pawn, but you also discover the attack on the queen, meaning that white isn't in time to take the bishop or to take the knight. Of course, queen takes g4 would allow knight takes g4 here. So that's why black could have got a winning position, but instead he moved the bishop back to f5. And the reason for this arrow is that we see that, the pawn on d3 is currently defended by the bishop and the pawn. And one thing I noticed kind of is quite common with a lot of players, like not just beginners, but some more advanced players as well, is that they will sometimes have some challenges visualizing the position correctly. And what I mean by this is that in this position, my wife played this move of knight g to e2 here. You might be wondering, can't white just take the pawn on g7? And technically you can, but it's also true that, black does get decent compensation for the pawn here, where they're going to develop their pieces pretty quickly and, castle long. And black has decent play for the material here, based on white being a little bit behind in development. But that's maybe not the most salient point of the game. But my wife played the move knight g to e2. And then, this is sort of a kind of psychological thing, but what will often happen is you'll be like, oh dang, I missed that, they can just take and win a pawn. But the thing is, actually after e takes d3, there's actually a move for white to save themselves here. And this sort of thing, it's very easy to make assumptions in chess, to think, oh, they made a capture, so we have to take back automatically. And if you're able to look for alternatives, this is known as the candidate moves technique in chess, by the way, a little bit of a calculation technique for you guys. Well, that will allow you to find better moves to see things that your opponents may be missing. And it's also, like I said, a psychological aspect, not beating yourself up after a mistake, but, just make the best of the situation in front of you. And if it's something you struggle with, you might find it helpful to think that, a friend gave you this position and, your friend's giving you the job of, trying to get me out of this mess, please. So at this point, if you need more time, this is probably a good moment to pause until you either figure out the solution or, perhaps after 5 minutes give up and, say, what's the answer, Max? But you might notice that we can actually make a counter-attack. Again, that question, what's a more aggressive way to deal with the opponent's threat so that we can take more control of the game? And that's where the move knight d4 comes in, because we're making a stronger threat of attacking their bishop. Actually, it's known as an intermediate move, in fact, or intermezzo. That's a bigger threat than their threat of taking our pawn. So when they do get their bishop out of the attack, say with bishop g6, well, now we can take back the pawn. Honestly, you could take it back either way, but I'm just going to say bishop takes for argument's sake. Well, white's managed to regain the pawn. Once we castle our king, you could castle either flank here, honestly. Well, then we'll have all of our pieces developed, and we're going to be well placed to have a decent middle game here. It is true on a strategic level, we do have a, black has an outpost square on e4, and we have a backward pawn on e3. But our lead in development somewhat compensates for these more strategic factors of the position, which I'm going to focus on a little bit less, see some of these positional elements in this training, because while they're definitely important as you move up the ranks, it is not quite as important when you're sort of below that kind of 1400-ish level where a lot of big tactical blunders are being made. And I mean, if you think back to what is deciding most of your chess games, well, it's basically, hanging pieces, hanging checkmates, and, not seeing some simple tactics, right? So that's what we're focusing on more here. So after c takes d3, bishop d3. Now, to white's credit, my wife saw that you can actually regain the pawn by taking. The position, however, is still much better for black because, well, black just has the lead in development and, there are a few weaknesses in white's position, around this point, as you can see. Black just develops normally, and white sort of played a kind of happy accident sort of move with knight to g3, where my wife kind of asked the question here of, well, can't black simply just take the knight for free? But kind of almost by good luck, it sort of happens that, white is taking the bishop back. We sort of discovered an attack with the bishop. And okay, black does win a pawn here, but, you do have the bishop pair and you do have the rook coming in. So, computer says black is much better, but you do at least have some practical chances with your bishop pair and, some slightly active pieces as such. But in the game, instead of playing this or, for that matter, just playing a move like bishop takes f1, and then we can do the elastic band to stop our knight being taken. But we still do lose a pawn, and this would still be a winning position for black here. And something I really like to do as well, like in my lessons, is I like to give some training positions for you to play out in your own time against a computer. Most of you watching us probably don't have like a human training partner that you sort of, play chess against and this sort of thing. But you can always play like against the bots on chess.com or, play against the, computer at like level 1 or something on Lichess. And playing this position for black's going to give you a really good practice and a skill that players of all levels actually struggle with a bit, which is turning a winning position into a win. And while there are some wise words I can say, like for example, well, there's some I'll share a bit later in this game analysis, but, just playing out the positions itself is going to give you confidence and a bit more skill in turning those winning positions into actual wins, rather than the frustration of constantly getting swindled. But instead of, playing this bishop takes f1 and, enjoying life, instead black counter-blundered, if you like, with bishop takes f4, which after queen f4 we just win a piece because our knight is defended. And after queen e7 is sort of the case where my wife, kind of forgot that you can just, take the piece with bishop takes d3 and, be up 2 pawns and be winning. That said, the move she played of knight f5 is not necessarily bad either at this point. White does still have a winning position, and computer points out a little bit of an opportunity that black had here to try and turn things around. Which actually, I remember I saw this when I was watching the game live. I saw that black could take and, try to muddy the waters with d4 and try to make use of this pin to create some practical chances. The pin being when you have a piece where if one piece moves and the piece behind it gets attacked as such. So I guess this kind of counts as a pin, even if it's, not quite as clear an example. But yeah, in the game after queen e6, both sides missed the bishop being on pre, but after g4, well, black now saw the bishop was under fire and we had an exchange. White took back with a pawn. Again, defensive move that also attacks the queen, which makes, you got the idea, the best defense is a good attack, yeah? So I'm going to play out the next few moves relatively quickly. Knight a4 is not the best move, but it's not terrible either. Knight h5. And once again, we see a concept. Well, maybe you can tell me by now, what is the concept that's coming into play with this move of queen to d4. Yeah, exactly. It's not just that we're defending our queen, but our defensive move also has the idea of attacking the pawn a7, which, it helps that you have the arrow here already, but just getting you to say it yourself is going to allow you to apply it more easily in your games, right? So black played knight e5, white went yum-yums with queen takes a7, and now black played the move knight to c4, trying to create some counterplay, and, well, I was going to set this as a puzzle, but it kind of, gave way to the solution a little bit with the arrows as we were talking about the position. But let me ask you this, what do you think is the principle that we're applying when we play moves like bishop takes c4 or moves like knight to b6 in this position? So the principle we're applying here is the principle of how to win a winning position, or at least the first rule of thumb for winning a winning position. And that is that when you're winning, when you have a winning position, you're up a piece, you're up a bunch of material, to basically try to exchange the pieces, to exchange the opponent's pieces. Why is that important? Well, basically I like to use, there are so many football metaphors in this training, even though I don't play football at all, but basically we can sort of use the idea of, say you're on the football field, you've got, well, let's just take number of pieces here, not including the king. You've got 6, players on the field for white, 5 on the field for black. Yeah, 6 versus 5 is definitely an advantage, right? But at the same time, those 5, they can, try to defend, they can try to hold. If the 5 players are better than the 6, maybe they can turn things around or something. So what you want to do is you want to get to a situation where you have 1 player on the field and they have 0 players on the field, because then you can just kick goals infinitely until, they resign or until the timer is up as such. So that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for that 1 versus 0, so we're the only one with a piece on the board. And what steers us towards this here is playing bishop takes c4, d takes c4, and you might have already noticed we can already start to apply the fork. This one not being a fork trick per se, but the fork is a type of tactic. So knight b6, forks the king and the pawn. And at this point, well, the computer is already saying you have forced mates in different ways, but even if you just take the pawn and bring the bishop in, like, that's easily going to be enough to have a decisive attack on the king to go over your extra piece. And something worth keeping in mind, like, I didn't say this in the actual lesson, but something I see a lot of even quite advanced players do is, like, when they're winning, they'll, like, go too defensively and play too passively and lose control of the game. So it's worth keeping in mind that sometimes the easiest way to win a winning position is just to keep that control of the game, keep your pieces active, find aggressive ways to deal with the opponent's threats, and that's going to allow you to win much more easily than if you curl up into a ball and hope that, they, run away or just resign as such. Because you keep in mind, like, they don't want to lose, right? So they're going to be resourceful, they're going to keep looking for tricks, so, sometimes putting a little bit more effort, showing a little more courage now may make our life a lot easier much later. In the game, white played a move bishop e2, which, to be fair, is not bad either. You're attacking the knight, you're developing the piece, these are all good things, and, you might notice that often a good move will do several things at the same time, yeah? But after knight f6, white played a move b3, which is not the best move, like you are opening up your king a little bit, but at least the idea of trying to get rid of the knight is not, like, terrible in itself. So after b3, knight d2, rook d2, knight e4, we can sort of see black now kind of, doing a good job of keeping the game going and, trying to create threats against our pieces and against our king. As we can see where, instead of playing rook c2 and, trying to keep everything protected here, white played the more aggressive rook d4, but, underestimated the power of the move queen a3. Now, in this position here, white played the move king to d1, and black now played the move of knight to c3 here, continuing to try to play quite aggressively. Now, after king to d2, at this point, black probably should just play a move like knight e4 check and just continue trying to harass the king. Although, if you want to play knight a4 and, trade off a defender, I mean, I don't mind this move either, to be fair. But instead, black played the move knight to b5, and this is a puzzle that covers a couple of other tactical motifs. I really want to focus on the tactical motifs this lesson, because once you get good at tactics, that's really what's going to take things to the next level for you and allow you to improve a lot more rapidly. After this game, I will share with you exactly how you should improve the tactics in order to make those patterns more automatic for you. But for now, let's think about this position. What do you think is the correct move for white to play at this point? And to be fair, my wife did find the second best move in this position, but if you find the best move, it makes your life so much easier. So let's see how you do. It's white to play. Yeah, it's nice thing when I just use the audio. Like, you don't see me, like, drinking the water pensively as such. If you need more time to think about this position, just pause the video, and when you've come to your decision, then, I'll share with you my thoughts. Okay, so in this position, well, let's start by showing you what my wife played in this game. She played the move knight to b6, and then after the illegal move king c7, she exchanged the queens. And this is all fine, like, white still has a winning position here after knight a4, like, you're up a piece, you're just up a piece for absolutely nothing. So that's fine, like, in this case, you're applying the principle of, exchanging the pieces, especially exchanging the queens, when you're up material. Exchanging the queens is a really good way of neutralizing the opponent's attack in general. It's like when you find yourself coming under attack, looking for a way to trade off their best attacking pieces can, take some of the edge off their attack, as it were. But let's say we go back here. You might have noticed that we actually have an opportunity to remove the defender. This is a type of chess tactic, and by removing the defender, we can actually set up a more powerful discovered attack, where after bishop takes b5, if they play the automatic c takes b5, well, now knight b6 is even more effective, because now we're discovering an attack on the queen on a3. It's a discovered check tactic, or discovered attack technically. But yeah, you take the queen and you just win the game because you're a queen up. Like, you guys know how to win with an extra queen. So, there are a couple other points that do need to be calculated, which is why I gave you a bit more time to think about it. Where, for one thing, you got to realize that after queen takes a2, that, we do have this move of king to c3, that the intermediate check's not actually scary, because if they take our bishop, once again, we can play knight b6 and win the queen once they get out of the check. And if they do play something like rook takes g2, once again, you can play king c3, and it might look like your king's somehow getting mated, but queen b2 is covered by the knight, queen c5 is covered by your pieces, so they don't have a good check, and we do still have that knight b6 to get the queens off. So we are still going to be winning in this position, essentially. And once the queens come off, yeah, your life gets a lot easier, of course. In the game, yeah, just returning how it played out. I'm going to fast forward a little bit, where, some of these moves aren't absolutely the best by either side, but, well, at least by white. But yeah, at this point already, just a couple of moves have kind of allowed black with active play to start to get back into the game. Where in this position, well, maybe the arrow might have given you a little bit of a hint potentially, but what do you think is the best move for white in this position? And by the way, if you did decide that you want to play king to d3, what would be your response if black played knight e5 then? So this one does feature a couple of tricky tactics, which is why I'm giving you a moment to pause if you need more time to think about it. So what happened in the game was my wife played the move king to d3. Black played a very nice move, knight to e5 check, as noted. And unfortunately, here is the turning point in the game, where white played the move king d2 as the only way to keep the bishop safe. The problem with this is that because the bishop is pinned, black can now play the move knight f3 and fork the king and the rook. It's kind of sort of interesting, when I'm doing a lesson with you, privately, because you already have kind of learned some lessons from the game. For example, would already face this move, so you kind of remember it when you saw it a second time. You know what I mean? It presents a slightly different way as such. But yeah, you can sort of see how the combination of the fork and the pin fits together to allow black to just take the extra exchange. And black's up the exchange and did go on to win pretty convincingly. d4 being a nice way to kind of bring the rook into the attack as well. So yeah, basically this was kind of a bit unfortunate for white to fall into this and lose the game. At this point, you kind of have to cut your losses and just let black take the bishop back. And, then this arising position does end up being about equal. Black's currently down a pawn, but they are going to get it back with the fork as such. After, say, rook d7. Something like this, they'll take one of the pawns and it'll just be an equal endgame at the end of the day. But, yeah, at this point, if we go back a move, the best move for white is probably just to play king e1 and then to, after knight takes e3. Black does admittedly still have some tricks. I mean, they do have potential counterplay against our king here. But we can play the move of knight c5 and, sort of bring out knight into e6, to cover the, the rook e8 idea. We can sort of block the attack on the e file. It's still a messy position, but is one where white should be better with correct play. So that's the way that white should have played it instead. So yeah, that was basically the game analysis. Some to do it differently. With some students, I'll cover several games relatively briefly, just kind of sharing the one or two really salient points, and then, focusing more on volume, as I'll probably be doing with my students I'll be coaching later today privately. And then with some other students, what I'll do is I'll kind of focus on one game, but go quite deep into it and show the different lessons you can really learn from that game, saying a lot of different puzzles with it, as we kind of did with the lesson here today. So what I'm going to do for this one, just based on the time we have, is I'm going to focus a little more on the training plan aspect. And, we have a training plan, yeah, the board kind of just rolled up and down there for a sec as I was, scrolling down for this rather large state I created. Now, something that, when I normally do a first lesson, I've already kind of had this conversation normally with the student, but because you're kind of just, watching this video sort of cold in the sense, I'm going to sort of talk about this with you as well, because it's something that I find not many coaches really talk about much or don't really have a clear system for, but it's something that's really, really important, I think, for continuing on this chess journey, to continue, feeling, inspired and, motivate even through the tough times, and to kind of remember, just, why it is that you are into chess, why is it that you want to get better at chess, And the reason kind of varies from person to person, right? But one sort of commonality I kind of find among the students that tend to improve, let's say, not just improve in general, but just improve more rapidly, is that they are really sort of clear on, they have a really deep love of chess. They really love chess. They get really into it as such. It's a, big hobby for them. But another thing as well is, really understand, okay, why is it important for me to get better at chess? And I want you to answer that question right now, actually. Like, let me know in the comments below, actually, why is it important for you to get better at chess? Because if you don't know this, then, well, you're going to potentially get very easily distracted away from, the goals that you want to achieve with chess, right? Or you might find yourself, like, keying yourself with thinking, oh yeah, I'm, like, putting a lot of time in chess because I'm watching a lot of YouTube videos, I'm watching a lot of Twitch streams, but you're not really putting a lot of time into what is actually going to make the biggest difference and allow you to win a lot more of your games against your current opponents as such. Now, for the answer you've written for why it's important for you to get better at chess, I want to go a little bit deeper. Like, think about, why does that exactly matter? What is the significance of this reason that you've mentioned? The pause here is to give you a chance to pause the video because I realize that maybe you've never really thought deeper about this, and you might need some time to figure this out as such, which is absolutely fine. When I do this exercise of like going deep into the why for something, like sometimes I'll just sit there, for like 5 minutes or something, to thinking out, okay, like what does this actually mean for me? In fact, let me ask that now. Like, what exactly does it mean for you to achieve your chess goal for 2024? And not just for you, what does it mean for others for you to become better at chess? Like, what impact is that going to have? Okay, so you've had a bit of time to think about it. I hope that you didn't just like think of the answers intellectually, but you actually wrote down the answers that you sort of came up with, because that's going to. It's the other thing with like learning in general, right? You're sort of going to retain things much more powerfully. You actually like handwritten and something you just kind of like type via text, and it's something I should do more myself because I remember because like just doing things on the computer, like just typing everything and like texting stuff on the mobile, like texting notes to myself. But yeah, like the handwritten aspect is really powerful for taking the key ideas, and maybe when I told you like to write things down, yeah, perhaps you have your notepad there with some different things to take away. And I'll get you to refer to that a little bit later, but first I do want to share, now we're clear on like the why of why it's important for you to improve at chess, I want to share a little bit of the how aspect as well. So one aspect that is sort of, I'm very cognizant of, is that, well, in this case you just have the video, like you don't have the access to, the various like training material I sort of would create for the first lesson, like for example, specific puzzles from your chess games that you played to help you improve your thought process for those situations the second time around. Or for that matter, like the different, instructive, games of the old masters, or instructive games of grandmasters, or even games from my own experience, sort of showing you, how to play different positions or how to master different thinking techniques. I'm well aware that, in this video, like I've, shown you the path, but I don't have like, you don't have like this access right now, this training material that, my private students have in that sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a kind of general plan that is really going to help address the common challenges that I see players below 1400 facing, which we also saw in the game that my wife played, which I just analyzed for you. And these are things like, the piece safety, making sure your pieces are safe, the counting, making sure, again, that, that you correctly count the number of attackers and the number of defenders to make sure that, your pieces, again, are safe. So a bit of an extension of the first one, piece safety / counting. And also other important things like making sure that you see the key tactics in the position, and that you are not like falling for some simple checkmate and such, that you're seeing the opponent's threats correctly, and that you're also playing with the right kind of energy, right? That you're basically, making sure your pieces are active and well placed, and that you're finding those ways to put the pressure on the opponent and take control of the game. And I'm aware that, these are all the skills that obviously, as you have more and more lessons on, we kind of build on those blocks, and I show you exactly how to do that, and I specifically train you on those skills, because a lot of these things I mentioned, there aren't really many resources in my experience to specifically train these skills, and that's where the coaching really provides that thing that you can't just easily find by yourself, like, in a very targeted training, as it were. So basically the three things I mainly recommend are basically the first one, and these three things are divided like 33% for each of these things in your training. So it means like whether you have, let's say, 4 hours a day for chess, up for 4 hours a week for chess, or 1 hour a day, or maybe you're a bit more ambitious and you have 2 hours a day, you spend on your chess. Whatever the case may be for you personally, I know it's going to be different for each of you watching this video, but a way that you can adapt it for regardless of the time is to spend 33% of your chess practice time on playing your games and learning from your games. I mean, you could debate like whether you should count like the games you play as like training or not. I think if you're playing like a rapid time trial, like 10 minutes or more, it's fair to count it as training. If it's like bullet or like fast blitz, I probably wouldn't count it at this stage. But if we sort of take like it, I'd say I'd spend 33% of your time learning from your games, even just doing the game review and understanding, okay, why is it that this move is better? Like, what I have to see to find that better move. It's going to make such a big difference because it's going to stop that frustration of repeating the same mistakes or not even being aware of the kind of mistakes you're really making as such. Because the awareness goes way beyond just this move was a mistake, right? It's good to know the why behind it. And also another thing that's really, really helpful, and this is something you probably might be doing already, but I think it's really important that you solve some chess tactics puzzles each day. And you can start with some very basic ones, like if you're rated below 1400 is the target audience for this video, I'd recommend starting with chess tactics for beginners. I believe that course is really going to help you to make sure you've mastered all the basic tactical patterns, to make sure you're keeping your pieces safe. In fact, one of my private students, he started to work for this program just a week ago and already kind of improved like from 1,000 to nearly 1,150 on chess.com rapid in just a week. So if it can happen for him, it shows that, it can definitely happen for you as well as such. Of course, your learning process might not be as fast. I get that everyone has a different timeline depending on, how much time you're putting into chess, on your current skill level, and, maybe some of you just have more of a talent for learning, let's say, than others as such, based on your experiences. But this is not like a race, it's about your own personal journey and, doing what works for you and not, getting too fixated on how much am I improving, but, trusting the process. Like, trust that if you're doing the right things over a long enough period of time, the results are going to eventually show themselves. And the third key thing as well, other than, learning from your games and solving the tactics on chess tactics for beginners, is to basically balance the remaining 33% between your openings, your strategy, and your endgames. What exactly is going to be the most important for you is going to vary perhaps a bit depending on where you're at, like right now, but if you find that you're often getting bad positions out of the opening, I'd probably focus on make sure you know your basic opening moves, like looking at what you've played most often in openingtree.com, and then, seeing, okay, how might I play it better next time I face this common move that my opponents often play against me. If it's you're focusing more on the strategy, what's going to really help there is to play through the games of Greco. Like, it's sort of, I like to make my lists as individualized as possible, but the one thing I kind of swear by putting in nearly all of my first lessons with my private students when they're rated below 1600 is to sort of share with them some Greco games to play through, because the Greco games are going to teach you the right energy to play. They're going to show you how to attack, how to set up the positions to make those tactics work, and how to sort of avoid some common mistakes that your opponents will often be making, because Greco shows how to punish those mistakes in his games. And another thing as well for endgames, I would start with lichess.org /practice. If you go to the Lichess Learn and Practice, it's a free resource, like Lichess airing on there is free, yeah? That's going to make sure that you know your basic checkmate patterns for the endgame, that you know your king and pawn endgames, that you know your basic rook endgames. And frankly, that's all the knowledge you really need in order to get to that 1600 plus level, not just online, but even over the board. So just make sure to do that. It'll take a little bit of time, I get, if you don't get through all of it in just 1 week, if you don't have a lot of time for chess. But if you do find that, you're sort of have maybe only like 4 or 5 hours a week for chess training or something, a way you can up that is to look for that pockets of dead time, like that time that normally you just would, just not really be doing anything. Like, say, if you're on a lunch break from work, or, you have like recess or lunch at school where you just don't really do all that much. Or let's say, for instance, you are kind of commuting, like you're traveling to and from work or to and from school. Well, these like these pockets of time that you can use to actually, solve some chess puzzles or, read a really interesting chess book. I think Dan Heisman's content is some of the best out there for beginners, by the way, if you do want a specific tip. And yeah, I think that's going to really allow you to get a lot more out of your, out of your chess training. But I want to hear from you as well. Like, I want you to write down what are some of the three main things from the three main takeaways that you've got from today's, video lesson as such. It's really important, by the way, that you write this down. I suppose you could also put in the comments below. That also works for me. But yeah, that's just going to allow you to retrieve the things that you've learned to make it part of you and your chess game. Because, you hear lots of people like telling this is what you should do. Like, it's probably not an unusual occurrence for you. But how many times have you actually applied it, right? So this aspect of, giving you that training plan and, sharing with you some of the key thinking techniques and, what actually is going to make a big difference in your games to give you the best results the most quickly. That's, something that you can actually apply to take things to the next level. Now, if I was to share what I think the three main takeaways from today were, the first one I would say is the value of sort of, making sure you know your openings, like make sure that you're setting up your pieces to stay active, to have them working together as a team, like in a football game as such. And so also on that football metaphor, we also talked about the role of the initiative in controlling the game. The second key aspect I'd mention is also that of piece safety, the importance of just, making sure your piece is safe and keeping in mind that, it's important to see the opponent's threat, but also look for more aggressive ways to deal with that threat, because we might be able to meet their threat with a stronger threat of our own, right? And I think the third key element also that I think really is going to be relevant for all of you is that when you're in a winning position, look for ways to, like when you're up material, look for ways to exchange off the opponent's pieces. Like if you can exchange off the queen, that's going to make it much harder for them to get a big attack going on your king to turn the game around. And yeah, to just keep in mind that, you don't have to go passive just because you're winning. Sometimes, again, the best defense can actually be an active defense, finding ways to make stronger threats and take that initiative and take that control of the game. And in my notes matter as well, a little bit of overlap between these ideas. And yeah, definitely I believe that if you apply the lessons that you've gained from today's video lesson, then you are in the long term going to see a difference in your chess improvement. Now, if you have found this really inspiring and you're wanting to, learn from me, let's say on a more, interactive way, or actually get on a call and we actually, talk about your chess and make it a lot more specific to you, then you're definitely welcome to reach out to me. The best way to do so is just via Messenger on Facebook. That's why I tend to check the most often. I've just put a link to that in the description below for you to be able to do that, because, that's the thing for me. I just love, helping people with their chess and sharing the insights that, would have saved me a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of frustration in my chess journey. So just really fulfilling me to make that process easier for you. Whether you buy from me or not, it's just a rewarding thing for me to continue doing, to know that, it's making a difference for you. On that note, yeah, that's all for today. I really enjoyed delivering this and, helping you out a bit with your chess. So yeah, see you in the next one and take care.